Su motivación más grande es integrar investigadores y hacer una dinámica de grupo que muchas veces es intensa intelectualmente, pero también muy, muy agradable. Bueno, pues adelante, profesor.
Thanks a lot for inviting me and for coming. So this evening, because for me it's already evening, I would like to explain an exact principle to solve many different problems related to vehicle routing problem. This is the title, by the way, which is solving the vehicle routing problem and its variants, because the method is applied for the VRP, which is the classical vehicle routing problem, but also for many other variants of this topic. I said with somebody last night that the experts come from outside. It's true that I come from outside because I am not Mexican, but I am a beginner on this topic. So I will try to explain as much as possible what I learned. And the method is a method which is not completely developed by me, but is a joint work with Aristide Mingozzi, Roberto Baldacci, Enrico Bartolini, Roberto Roberti, all of them from Cesena. Next slide, please. So the idea of the talk, it will be the following. First of all, I will try to explain what is the problem. Then I will try to give an outline of the method, but going inside this method, but taking care of some simpler problem where you can appreciate the methodology. Then I will explain how is the framework of the exact method I would like to explain you. But again, I will not go into the details. I will give you only the outline. And then I will try to show that it is very well done because you can apply so many variants. And then I will show you in particular two other topics where the decision variable are not only the quantity that you have to deliver to a customer and the route of the vehicle, but also how and when you want to open depot. So I don't know how many of you know operational research, but the idea of operational research and combinatorial optimization is that each variable is a decision variable. So this is doesn't matter if you want to decide how quantity you want to produce, or which route the vehicle should have do, but each variable that we use is a decision variable. So next slide, please. Next. So I think that before going in words and symbol and some stuff more theoretical, I think that a picture is the best way to explain what we are speaking. So we are talking about one depot, a set of clients spread all around the city or the map, doesn't matter. And then we have a node for each customer or a vertex for each customer. And close to each vertex there is a quantity, so this is the demand. In the depot there are some vehicles, in this case there are 3 vehicles. You have 30 customers, and each vehicle has a capacity of 200. So you want to design the best route. The best route means normally the mean cost route, so the route that costs the minimum possible. There's the minimum cost. And you want to deliver the quantity to the customer and to come back to the depot. So this is the idea. So the decision variable, as you can imagine, behind this picture there is the idea of a graph. A graph is a set of nodes and a set of edges. I will not give you the details of what is graph, and because it will be too much, but the idea is that you have to design the route. So you have to choose among the n square possible arcs or edges that you have, the n, because you use only n in this case, that you want to use to pick up or to deliver the quantity to the client. So this is the main purpose of the capacitated VRP. So you can call VRP or capacitated VRP. The C is for capacitated. Capacitated means that vehicle has a capacity. Next, please. So in a more formal way, this is the graph, so with the nodes or the vertices and the edges. So there is the set of client, this is the set of the client plus the depot. Then you have the edge, and you have the distance of the cost or whatever you want associated to each edge. Normally it's the distance, it could be the cost, or could be the kilometer, or could be the time. Then you have the vehicle with the queue, and we have the demand of each client. And then a route is an elementary cycle. It means that it passes through one client only once, not more than once, not less than once. And you want to deserve all the clients in this case. And next, please. So we need also to introduce some other symbol. We need to introduce all the set of subset of client greater than 2. Then we have to introduce a symbol that say that given a subset of client, you sum up all the demand, you have the demand of the subset of client. Then of course you can guess how many vehicles you need to deserve this subset of clients. It is enough to divide the total demand with the capacity, and you get the number of vehicles that you need. Rounded up, because you cannot split the vehicles in two, you can imagine, so you have to go there with a truck or without a truck, so you need to round up. And then you need to introduce delta, which is all the edges between the subset of client and outside. So there is one client inside, another outside. This is what we call the cat, because it's all the edges between these two subsets. And then we have the variables. We have the integer variables, because again, we want to decide which edge we will use. So we have binary variables between 0 and 1. There is a special case, because the depot, the variables can get value 0, 1, or 2. Why 2? Because it is possible that you have what we call a single customer route. So suppose that you have a customer with a demand of 200, so you can go there with one vehicle and go come back. And since the edges are not arcs, you have to put 2 to have the equality satisfied. Okay? So let's go to the model, to the mathematical model. Next. The mathematical model, it's look quite simple. So you want to deserve each client. So for each client, you want a degree of 2. If you sum up from all the edges that are incident to this client. Then for the depot, you have 2 times m, where m is the vehicles that you use. You want to use all the fleet of vehicles that you have, in this case. And then you have these particular constraints that for which of you that knows the TSP is the sub-2 elimination constraints. If you don't know the TSP, the idea is that you want to remove, or you want to be sure that you go inside the subset of client with the right number of vehicles, maybe more but not less. This is what we are saying here. We are saying that we want to enter to this subset S with the right number of vehicles. And if you remember, this K has been calculated as the sum over all the clients of the demand divided by the capacity, rounded up again. So this formulation looks quite simple. This morning you had much more difficult formulation with much more variables, but still it is difficult, it is MPR. Why? Next slide, please. So it is hard because behind this simple formulation there are 2 different combinatorial optimization problems, very, very well known. The most famous, one of them at least, the most, like the TSP, the most famous one, which is the knapsack problem. Can you switch, can you go in push the blue button, please? Thanks. So the knapsack problem is the following. You have a knapsack with a capacity, And we had the set of, you have a set of objects and of items, and you want to decide which items you have to put in the knapsack. Each item has a profit, and each item has a weight. You can imagine if you are doing your luggage to travel, and you want to decide which kind of thing you can bring with you, since the capacity of the luggage that you have is limited in volume or in weight, doesn't matter. And you have a profit. It means that you would like this t-shirt or these jeans or whatever you prefer to bring with you. So the idea is you have to decide the subset of objects that you want to put in the luggage. This is already an NP-hard problem. And it is quite simple, because it's really the simplest you can imagine. But the characteristic of this problem is that it has the same constraints that the vehicles. In the vehicles you have the capacity of the vehicles, and here you have the capacity of the knapsack. So these constraints appear already in the VRP. But even worse, sorry, can you come back on the previous slide and go in the other one with the bin packing? Many thanks. So the other story, again related to languages if you want, and you want to decide where, so you have many languages, many possible, I don't know the name in English, valise en français, I don't know in English, sorry, but you have many bags, and you know that the company, the flight company that you will use, you have to pay for each bag that you want to carry on. So you want to minimize this number of bags that you will bring with you, but you want to use all your objects. So you don't want to live in Mexico or in Monterrey or whatever you can bring with you, or whatever you would like to bring with you. So you need to bring everything, and you need to respect the volume or capacity constraints of the bin packing. Again, you can imagine that this is quite similar to the VRP, but it's simpler because you don't have the routing part. So you are not designing routing, you only decide which object should be in which vehicle, for example. You can imagine this is a vehicle and you have clients, so you want to satisfy all the clients, and you want to respect the capacity, and you want to minimize the number of vehicles, okay? So these two problems, which is simpler, are already very difficult. Next slide, you can back on the previous and go, one more. So, which are the advantage and disadvantage of this formulation? So the advantage is that it is possible to add some inequality and to increase the lower bound. So all the time, I mean the people working in combinatorial optimization, integer programming, takes our time to try to reduce the gap. The gap is the distance between the lower bound, so is a lower estimation of the objective function. If we are minimizing, if we are maximizing, is the opposite. And the upper bound, which is a feasible solution, maybe it is costly than the optimal. So you want to minimize this distance, so to reduce the distance between the lower bound and the upper bound. So to have a good lower bound is a very good thing for us. So formulation with very bad lower bound doesn't have that much. So this formulation has the advantage that during several years, many researchers study a lot of constraints. So you have a lot of constraints in the literature that you can add to increase the lower bound. The other advantage is that is the closed form. So you have a finite number of variables and a finite number of constraints. Which is, by the way, not true because the capacity constraints are not finite. So, but we have a finite number of variables. So you don't need to generate them. This is what I mean with column generation. I will explain in a moment what does it mean. And then it works well for some kind of instance with a great capacity, but it doesn't work well for instance with huge capacity. So this is what I said, generally a very weak linear relaxation, so the lower bound is very weak. And the inequality, or the cut, what I call inequality, we call also cut, are difficult to separate. So normally the procedure to separate are heuristic. So you never know if you have already generated all the inequality that you can use. And the other weak point of this formulation that is difficult to adapt to much more difficult variant of the CVRB. So what we can imagine is to change the formulation and suppose that you know a root. So you suppose that you are able to generate a root starting from the input, going through some customer, a subset of them, and then come back to the depot. So if you know this root, you can imagine that you can design another formulation. Can you go to the next slide, please? Which is this one. So in this one, you have all the set of root that you could use, the cost of each root. I repeat, as I said, in this case, you don't have the capacity constraints because you have already generated the root. So the root respects the capacity. So you know the path from the depot to the depot, and you pass through a subset of nodes. And then you want that each client is visited one, so it doesn't matter in which vehicle it is. It could be in several vehicles, because you have several routes that can pass through this customer, but you want that at the end it's visit. And then you want that the number of vehicles that you use is equal m, not less than m, because this is the number of the fleet that you have, the dimension of the fleet. And you don't want to use less, neither more. This formulation, you can go to the next slide, please, has one very weak point, which is that the number of root is exponential. So this is an exponential formulation. The advantage is they don't have anymore the capacity constraints. The capacity constraints was the capacity constraints in the knapsack or in the bin packing, which make the problem hard. So now the problem is that you have to generate the root. So you cannot use only the root that you know. You have to be aware that you have generated all you need, the root that you need to have the optimal solution. And as I told you, the roots are exponential, so we have to be careful and to be aware if you know the method to generate root easily, and you are sure that they are useful. So when you generate a root, it is included in the solution. The advantage is that the bound is much better, so the linear relaxation is stronger than the previous one. And you don't have many constraints, because you have only the constraints saying that you want to visit all the customer and that you want to visit the depot, so not that much. And you can adapt the inequality that I will show you, no, I will not show you, but that you can imagine there is in the literature for the previous formulation. They exist also for this one, and you can adapt it from one to another. The problem is that, as I told you, the huge number of columns. So how we can generate it? Now, I stop here for a moment with the VRP, because it takes too much time to go into detail. I change the problem, and I will speak to you about the set partitioning problem. Can you go to the next slide, please? Again. So the set partitioning is the following problem. Imagine that you have a set of objects, and then you want to build a subset of objects, and to each subset of this object you have a cost associated. Then you want to choose a family of these subsets such that all the objects that you have are in somewhere, okay? And you want to minimize the cost. This is the set partitioning. You can imagine it is close again to the VRP, because you can imagine that a partitioning means a partition, or a subset means a subset of clients, for example. So you want that all the clients are visited. You want to know how to split the client among the subset. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is the problem. And as you can see, the formulation is not that far from the formulation that I presented to you before for the VRP. What it changed? It changed that the number of objects now is again finite as this number of clients, and the columns are not anymore exponential. So what I told you is the number of roots could be exponential, and you have to generate them. You cannot have all of them at the same time. Here, this number is known in advance, so it's smaller. And then you have, again, integer variables. Okay? With the symbol ni, it means that is the subset that cover the row of the customer I. So I have to sum for the j that cover this client, and I wanted that one and only one of these should be in the solution. Okay? So I guarantee that you have partitioning the customer or the objects or whatever you want in different subset. So the problem is still hard to solve. So we have to imagine how we can solve this problem easily and with good lower bound or to optimality. So this is my purpose, is to explain how we can get a good lower bound to solve this problem. The first idea that you can have is take all these constraints, put the Lagrange multipliers, and relax them in the objective function. So if you know the Lagrange relaxation, it means that you relax all the constraints, you don't have anymore any constraints, you have everything in the objective function, and you can imagine that you want to minimize the cost. So if the Lagrange multiplier has a cost that gives you 0, so C minus Lagrange multiplier give you something which is close to 0 or 0, then you will get this subset. Otherwise, you will discard it, because you are not anymore obliged to pass for everything because it is relaxed, but you want to minimize the objective function. So you will, by exploration, you will order the cost starting from 0 up to the maximum value that you have, and you will choose those that have the minimal cost, it means 0. This is one way. The other way, can you go to the next slide, please? Sorry, no, I forgot. First of all, I want to present the dual. I don't know how many of you are used with the dual. So you have the transpose of the matrix of the constraints. You have the coefficient of the right-hand side of the previous formulation become the coefficient of the objective function on this formulation, and the coefficient of the objective function become the right-hand side of the dual. And any solution of this dual problem is an upper bound or a lower bound of the primal problem, which is a strong property of duality. And the dual variable should be real because you have equal constraints in the primal. You remember you want to that each customer is visited once, so you have equal constraints. And so you have a dual multiplier or a dual variable, a Lagrange multiplier, which is the same of a dual variable, which is a real number. So it's not constrained to be positive as usual in the linear programming or in integer programming. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? So what I propose to do is the following operation. I want to substitute the initial variable of the problem, so x, j, with the y, ij, with the following property. You associate a weight, qi, to each object of the object that you want to divide in subset. And then you can define the sum of this weight of this q, which is this qrj, which is the sum of them. And then you can say that the ratio multiplied for this variable should be equal xj. And this guarantees that if you put every object you choose each y, then you can fix the x to 1, and if on the other way around, if you have fixed this value to 1, then all of these should be equal 1, and if it is fixed to 0, all of these should be equal to 0. What does it mean? It means that we are splitting, so in the previous formulation, xj was the variable of one root, of one subset, or yes, one subset. So it was variable indicated a subset. Now we are splitting this variable in many variables, one for each intersection between a column and row. So for each subset, we are using the variables which say that this is the intersection between customer I and column J. So we are splitting, again, one variable for each column in several variables. It depends on many objects you have in this subset, but one variable for each object that you have in the subset. Okay? Can you move to the next one? So we can reformulate the set partitioning problem that I show you in this way. It is nothing that to replace this quantity instead of x. So before here you had x, and now we have this strange sum of the quantity, which represents somehow, if you think about the idea that you have choose only a subset of set in the a subset of objects in the subset. So let's try to speak again. You have a big subset of objects, you choose only a subset. So you choose only a subset of this variable, not all of them. So the x associated to this subset is not equal 1, but is equal to the fraction, because we are using, or we are choosing only a subset of intersection of row and column respect to the whole one. Then we had these constraints. That means that we want to choose for each intersection, row and column, 1. Again, the intuition behind is that among the ratio, so for each column, for each subset, we have a cost. We are splitting somehow this cost over all the items that are in the subset. So each item takes a small part, a fraction of the whole cost. And then you can have these items in several subsets, each one with a different cost. And you want to choose the subset which cover this client, or which items at minimal cost. Okay? Can you move in the next slide, please? Nothing happened. Next, please. Thanks. So this is the Lagrangian relaxation. So we relax in Lagrangian fashion the constraints that we had before. This constraint now makes sense because it was redundant in the previous slide, and now it makes sense. And I will show to you that what you want to guarantee this ratio should be the minimal one. So this ratio is the cost of the subset divided by the quantity in the subset. So for each item, you have a value which is the cost of the complete subset divided by the quantity that there is in the subset. So each item takes a small part of this cost. So you can imagine if you have a route which visits all the client, which costs 0, you have the cost of the route, which is 0, divided by the number of customers, which are all. So the amount for each customer is nothing. If you have a route which costs 1,000 million and visit only one customer, and this customer is visited only by this route, it's a huge cost, because it's the cost of the route divided by the customer visited. Or you can imagine in this case, because he said partitioning, is the cost of the subset divided by the items that are in the subset. So it's a cost which is trying to understand how much it costs, how this column cover this row. The idea is how much it costs for this column to cover this row, how much it costs for this route to pass for this customer. Okay, this is the idea behind. Next, please. So it's easy now to solve the problem because what you want to do is you do this ratio. So for each columns that visit, for each route that visit a customer, for each subset that takes the object, you divided the cost of the item, of the subset of the route divided by the total quantity, multiplied times the quantity that each customer represents or the items represented in the subset. And then you take the minimum, of course. So among all the columns, so you have many, you can imagine many columns, among all the columns that are taking care of these items, so of this row, you want to choose the one which has the minimum cost or the minimum ratio. And so you put to one the variable in the intersection between a column and rows, okay? And then it's easy, then it's done, because you remember the constraints say that you have to cover all the intersection columns and rows with only one variable. You choose the one which has minimal cost, and then you sum up over all the customer. And then you have done. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what is interesting is that you can estimate, or you can put the value of the dual variable of the problem equal to this ratio. So the ratio, I repeat again, the cost of the subset divided by the whole quantity that you have the subset give you this value for each intersection over a column if you sum over it, over all the customer. And then this is the dual variable, which is an interesting thing because then you can improve, I didn't say, but you can improve because you don't forget that you have the Lagrange relaxation, which is taking care of the fact that in reality you don't want to visit only customer, but you want a column. So these dual variables are telling you, wait, if you are selecting a different column for different customer, you should be aware that in reality this is the same, so you have to take care of this with this Lagrange multiplier, which is the initial constraints saying that the sum over j of xj is equal 1, which we substitute with this operation, then we relax in the Lagrangian fashion. I skipped the proof that this is equal to the dual variable because I think it's boring and it's not time for doing it. Can you go to the next slide, please? It's very easy to prove, but I won't do boring you. The idea again is this is the cost. So if you sum over all the client, you will come up with this inequality satisfied. Can you go to the next slide, please? And then we can also imagine that you can find the best multiplier in order to have the best dual variables, because the dual value, sorry, because we said that the sum of the dual variable give you a dual solution, which is a bound of the primal solution. Can you go to the next slide, please? And I can show you, I can prove you that the classical Lagrange relaxation has a worse result than this relaxation. So this idea to relax the constraints when they are split over all the customer, or all the items, is better than to use the Lagrange relaxation as I described at the beginning, where you relax all the constraints that you want to visit all the customer. And if you go to the next slide, we have the sketch of the proof, which is again time consuming, so I will skip. And I will go to an example. Can you go one small slide? Next. So let's take an example. This is an example, though you have the cost of the subset of the columns. This is the column, the matrix. So the first columns cover items 1 and items 2. The second columns cover items 3, item 4. The fourth column cover items 5, 6, and 7, and so on. And then you have the Lagrangian multiplier, the optimal one, and the Q. So the quantity that we associate to each customer. In this case, it is equal 1. You can calculate the reduced cost, which is this value minus the lambda for each object that you cover. So in this case, it is 2 minus 2 is equal 0. And the second one is 2 minus 1 and 2, so this 2 lambda, this 2, 1, so it's equal 0. In the third one, it is the cost, it was 1 minus 0, it is still 1. In the third one is 1 minus 0, because you have 0 for this value of the lambda, and it is 1, and so on and so forth. So this is the reduced cost. So the cost of the initial column reduced by the dual variables lambda. And then it's clear that, as I told you, in the classical Lagrangian relaxation of the problem, what you want to fix is only these first two columns, because the cost is 0. So you don't have any constraints, because you have relaxed everything in the objective function. So you are not obliged to cover everything. You want only to choose those that minimize, so this one. And then you have, if you remember the Lagrangian relaxation, the constraint was xi minus 1. So it's lambda xi minus lambda I. Then xi is c minus lambda multiplied by x minus the sum of lambda. So you have only the sum of, plus the sum of lambda. So you have only the sum of lambda, which is remain. And then you have, for the other problem, this value. Why you have this value? Because I told you, you want to cover the object or the items with the best row. So which is the best column which cover the first object? So the first column cover this object with 0, okay? The second, this column cover this object with cost 4, and this column cover this object with 4. So the best way to cover the first item, given the operation that we did, is to choose 0. So we choose 0 for the first item. Again, the second item, which is the best column that cover this item, the first 0, the first 0, the second one is 4, and then is 3. So the minimum between 0, 4, and 3 is 0. So then you cover the second. The third is, again, is 0 the best, because this is 0, and everything else is greater. The 4, again, this is 0, and this is greater. This one is covered by only this column, which is 1. So the minimum is 1. You cannot do better. This is why I have this variable, because it is the variable associated to the intersection between this row and this column. This is why you have two indexes. One is the index of the row, one in the index of the column. Again for this one, again for this one. So you have 3, which is the y variables, plus, again, as before, the sum of lambda, because you have each lambda for each intersection of customer or row and column, because you did the Lagrangian relaxation at the same time. So we have a lower bound with 7. So the lower bound that we obtain with this ratio is much better than the lower bound that you obtain with the Lagrangian relaxation. So to summarize what we did, we only split each columns in each row and columns, and we forgot the idea that it was an entire column. We take only each intersection of column or subset and row. Okay, can you go to the next slide? We can skip this because it's much more too difficult to understand in a few minutes. Next, please. And what I'm saying here, that when you maximize over lambda, so you choose the best Lagrangian multiplier, you can obtain the optimal dual solution. This is a classical result of the duality, because you know that you can get the primal solution equal to the dual solution. So it's nothing interesting for those that know linear programming. Next, please. Then I will, so don't forget these, because we will use in the following this idea of understand which is the best column which cover the row, okay? Which is the idea behind. Then I will show you what is the additive bounding. So this is the additive bounding. The idea is the following. We have this linear integer programming problem, so the objective function, the constraints, integer variable. Then you have the dual. As I said, since these equal constraints, these are unrestricted, this coefficient become the right-hand side, this right-hand side become the coefficient. Next, please. Then we can use the idea that each feasible dual solution is a lower bound of the primal problem. So what we do is that we solve and we find a feasible solution of the dual problem. Then, given the dual solution of the primal problem, we remove what we have chosen in the dual solution. We obtain another problem which is depending from the first one, and you solve this again. And the sum of the value of the previous dual feasible solution and the second dual feasible solution, so the sum of these give you a dual bound. So what I'm saying, this is why we call additive bounding, that you can solve a dual problem, not to optimally, but only to a feasible solution, get the value, then remove the value that you have to the original problem. You get a second problem, which is different from the previous. You solve it, and you get another value. And the sum of these values, and you can continue iteratively several times, give you a good lower bound of your original problem. Okay? So keep in mind that you can solve consecutively different problems, and each time you get a value that you get sum up to get a better lower bound. Next slide, please. Next. So this is what I promise you. I don't want to go into the detail because it's boring, it's too technical. There are many things that I skip. I don't want to go to detail. The idea to solve the VLP, so the original problem, the problem where you have the depot, the vehicle, and the customer. With this method, the idea is that you have to generate column. It means that you have to generate root. So we can write the problem, and we can understand which is an elementary shortest path with resource constraints. So it's an elementary shortest path. You can use something, labeling, algorithm, Dijkstra, or whatever you want, but with the particularity that you have resource constraints. So it is normally NP-hard. But in some case, it is pseudo-polynomial. It depends from the capacity of the vehicle, and it depends on the idea that we don't want elementary root at the beginning, but so we don't want to root with only passing once and only once through the customer, while we allow root that pass several times to the customer, okay? And then we use also the dual variable, because if you do column generation, you need to write the dual and to understand that the reduced cost matrix, so the reduced cost is those that saying that the variable which is not present in your problem is useful. Okay, this is linear programming again. If you remember linear programming, when you use simplex, when you use the simplex method, and you are in a base, you discover that there are a variable that should enter the bases, and another one that should go out. And the idea is based on the reduced cost. So it's the original cost minus the dual variable. I have not time to go into detail of the integer program, linear program, but this is what I'm saying here. You have a dual variable associated to each customer. You have two edges entering in each customer in the solution, and then you remove 1/2 of one customer and 1/2 of the other one to the original cost. And this gives you the reduced cost. With this reduced cost, you're trying to find a root which is necessary, that you need in your pool of root, because as reduced cost, negative reduced cost, you add it, and then you solve the master. Okay, in the column generation, you split in two, in the master and the slave. This is the slave, so the why and how you choose a root, which is not there, because I recall you have an infinite number of roots, so you have to generate on the fly. And then you have to solve the master. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in the master, what is nice, that we can use the same formula that I showed you before for the set partitioning, but now for the vehicle routing problem. So we are able to estimate the dual variables using this small formula. It means that we are not necessary to use the simplex method. So we are not using the simplex method. We have a lot of problem with this kind of problem like set partitioning, because there is a lot of degeneracy. So you have a lot of solution. In this case, you can estimate with only a small formula based on the idea that you take the cost of the root and you divide it times the capacity. And with this dual variable, so you have a dual variable, one for each customer, calculate it easily. You go back in the slave problem, you remove from the initial cost of the arc the 1/2 of the dual variable associated with the customer, and you generate another root. So the idea of the method is to solve the problem each time improving the constraints. So the first time you solve it, you solve with non-elementary root. Then you generate elementary root, but you allow to pass through the customer several times. And then you generate elementary root. This is why I present you the additive bounding, because each time you use non-elementary root, you have something which is not the real solution, but the dual is feasible, so it is a bound, a lower bound. Then you add real root, but you allow to pass for the same customer several times, and this is a second bound. Then you will be build on top of them the third, and so on. Can you go to the next slide? So this is the idea. The idea is that you solve several times a different subproblem, all the value that you get here you use in the second one. So you can imagine as a warm startup of the simplex. What we are using is the better and better dual variables calculated with the formula that I show you. So this is the outline of the method. And this method is very powerful because with this approach we solve to optimality several family of problems. Can you go to the next slide, please? Next. So this is only to say that this method was able to solve 77 problems, and the other one 78, but this computer time is much better than this one. And what is nice is the bound. The bound is really close to 100. Okay. So I don't have time to go into detail of the other approach that I would like to show you, but I can give you an idea of what we are able to solve with this approach. So can you go to the next, please? Next. So we solve the heterogeneous vehicle routing problem. Next. Which is all this family of problems. So capacitated vehicle routing problem, fleet size and mix CRP. It means that in this case, the fleet of vehicles that you have is fixed. Then you have this variant where the routing cost depends on the vehicle. You can imagine an heterogeneous fleet of vehicles because you don't have always the same, and so on. Next slide. We are able to pick up and deliver problem with time windows. Next slide. The idea is the following. You have to pick up something and to deliver something. It is like a taxi or a shared taxi. So you can go from the depot, pick up something, pick up something, pick up something, drop, pick up, drop, drop, and drop. And you can imagine this is a passenger that you want that could be in your van. And you have the time windows because you have to be in the airport at 6 in the morning, or you have to be at the conference at 8 in the morning. So you may have time windows that constrains the time you have arrived in the pickup and in delivery. Next slide. Next. The periodic vehicle routing problem is the following. Next. So we have a customer which demand to be delivered only once over the week. Next, please. Again, again, again. So do you have customer 4 times, 1 for each day? Then you have too fast. Then you have customer that ask to be picked up the 4 days. And there is another picture. Next one. No, too fast. Here. And then there are customers that ask to pick up 2 days in the week. So maybe Monday and Friday. So one has to pick up only 1 day, the second one 2 days, and the third one all the week, so every day. And then you have to build a route. Next slide. Next. So you have to build a route in order to satisfy the idea that the green point should be satisfied only once, the red 2, and the black 4 times. This is the periodic. Next. Then we are able always to solve the vehicle routing problem with the fractional objective function, which is non-linear because it's fx over gx. Next, please. So this is the result. But again, what is nice is the lower bound is always close to 100. Okay? Next. 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 And then we are able to solve something like this kind of problem when you want to decide which depot to open and how to assign customer to a depot and how to do the route. So you can imagine that the decision is not anymore only the route, but is also which depot to open and how quantity you have to deliver from which depot, which is a location routing problem, and the decision variable are of 2 types, routing and location. If you go to the next slide, next. This is the formulation. This is nice because you have the routing cost, the fixed cost to open the depot, and then you have a beam packing. If you remember, this is exactly a beam packing because these capacity constraints with the bin, and then you want to reserve all the customers. The problem is that this formulation is already an exponential formulation. So it's a beam packing with an exponential number of objects, because this is, again, the route. So the route starting from depot K, going through the customer, and coming back to the depot. So you can imagine that this number is an exponential. And we manage with the same principle, to solve also this kind of problem. And another one that I don't have time to show you, which is the 2-echelon VRP, but the idea is the same. You have 2 types of decisions, so strategic decision, how many depots you want to open and how big they are, and tactical decision, so how you serve customers. So with this same principle, we are able to solve to optimality these other family of problems in the research. Thanks a lot.
Hola. Thank you, Roberto, for a very good presentation. It was very interesting. I had one question. That so each time of your current generation, you generate one problem, right?
No, more than one.
And for all of them, you are computing the additive bound each time for each of these two?
No, the additive bound is computing when you solve the first whole problem, the master problem with non-elementary root. Then you do, and you solve these, and you get dual variable. With this dual variable, which is like a warm startup, because then you can go back to the graph and look for elementary root. But with this dual variable coming from the previous master problem, where you add only non-elementary root. And then so in the second round you have non-elementary root, elementary root, but you still have these constraints which is violated, where you can pass through the customer several times. And then with this new dual variable, you go back in the graph and you generate some other root, and so on and so forth. This is why it's additive, because the dual variable that you generate is the better and better.
¿Hay alguna otra pregunta? A ver.
For a complete outsider of the subject, is there any relation of these kind of problems with Monge-Kanterovich, optimal transportation problem, and all those kind of things? Monge-Kanterovich.
I don't know Monge-Kanterovich, I'm sorry.
Optimal problem.
Monge, yes, it is related, but far. But it's related, because Monge-Kanterovich is transportation, yes, sure. But you want transport object from one side to another one. That's all. You don't have to do route. So there is a transportation behind Monge-Kanterovich that is only from one depot to one client. So we have only one connection. You don't have the routing part. So it's easy to solve for the integer program inside of.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Bueno, pues vamos a agradecerle mucho al doctor otra vez. La Sociedad Matemática Mexicana otorga el presente reconocimiento a Roberto Wolfler Calvo. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.